The Silence Challenge. The afternoon sun filtered through the windows of the Oakland gym, casting long shadows across the mat. Bruce Lee, with his slender body and defined muscles, moved with the precision of a feline in his stretching exercises. Every movement was fluid, calculated, a dance between strength and flexibility. The other students watched in silence, accustomed to the almost supernatural intensity with which he trained. It was then that the door opened with a bang. An immense man, with shoulders as broad as a bull and arms as thick as logs, entered the space. He was a professional wrestler, known in the ring as the Colossus, a 280-pound giant who had crushed opponents with his raw weight. His eyes, small and disdainful, swept the room until they landed on Bruce, who continued his stretches as if nothing had happened. "Look at this," the fighter laughed, crossing his arms. "A little chicken stretching as if it were going to fight. I bet one blow knocks this one down." The students exchanged nervous glances. Some knew of Bruce's reputation, but few had seen what he was capable of when provoked. The giant, however, didn't care. He approached, the ground shaking slightly beneath his steps. "You there, Skinny. Do you know what happens when a real man touches someone like you?" Bruce didn't stop. He finished stretching, stood up slowly and faced the fighter with a disturbing calm. His eyes, dark and penetrating, showed no anger, just a cold certainty. "You talk too much," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "And he speaks without knowing." The giant snorted, irritated. He extended his huge hand, as if he were going to playfully push Bruce. It was a mistake. In the blink of an eye, Bruce moved. There was no warning, no preparation, just a flash of lightning. His right hand grabbed the fighter's wrist with surgical precision, twisting it at an impossible angle. Before the man could react, Bruce spun, using the giant's own weight against him, and threw him with a dull thud against the mat. The impact made the gym shake. The fighter tried to get up, but Bruce was already on top of him, one knee pressing into his chest, the other hand holding his arm in a joint lock that left no room for resistance. 6 seconds, Bruce murmured, leaning in slightly. "That's how long it took you to discover that words don't mean anything." The giant tried to struggle, but each movement only increased the pain. His face contorted, not in fury, but in disbelief. "I had never been mastered like this, so quickly, so easily." Bruce released him as calmly as he had attacked. He got up, adjusted his GI and went back to stretching, as if nothing had happened. The fighter lay on the ground for a long moment, panting, before dragging himself away without saying a word. The students remained silent, knowing they had witnessed something few would understand, the true essence of Jeet Kune Do. It wasn't about strength. It wasn't about size. It was about efficiency. About movement. About the art of ending a fight before it even starts. The weight of silence. The following days were strangely calm in the dojo. The giant, whose name, it later turned out, was Victor, did not return. Some students whispered that he had sought out other masters, others said that he had given up martial arts forever. Bruce didn't comment. It didn't need to. The void left by the confrontation was response enough. But the silence would not last. A week later, 3 men appeared at the dojo door. They were not students. They wore dark suits, polished shoes, and one of them carried a leather briefcase. The oldest, with gray hair and a thin scar on his upper lip, entered without asking for permission. "Sifu Lee," he said, with a tone that wasn't exactly a question. "We need to talk." Bruce didn't stop wrapping the bandages around his hands. He looked at the man as if he were any student late for class. "I'm listening." The man opened the folder. Inside, there were photos. Victor, bloodied, being carried out of a private hospital. Others, older, from clandestine fights, with bets written down on yellowed paper. And, in the center, a sheet with a prominent name, the Black Dragon Society. "Your student injured one of ours. An important businessman. He won't forget this." Bruce finished wrapping the band, tested the tension with his fingers. He was not my student. It doesn't matter. The man closed the folder with a snap. The point is that you interfered in something that doesn't concern you. If he was hurting someone, it concerns me. One of the men behind the leader laughed, low and humorless. You don't understand, Sifu. It's not about right or wrong. It's about respect. Bruce finally looked up. The dojo seemed smaller with those three there, as if the air had become thicker. Respect is something you earn. It is not required. The leader smiled, but his eyes remained cold. Then you leave us no choice. The two men behind him moved at the same time, taking off their jackets. One of them pulled a steel chain from his pocket. The other flexed his fingers, revealing silver rings with sharp tips. Bruce sighed. You didn't learn anything from Victor. The first blow came quickly, the current slicing through the air toward his head. Bruce dodged with minimal movement, letting the metal pass inches from his face. The second man lunged forward with a punch, but found only emptiness. Bruce was already behind him, pressing a pressure point on his neck that caused him to fall to his knees, unconscious before he hit the ground. The leader took out a knife. You're good. But it's not invincible. Bruce didn't respond. He just watched the blade shine in the light of the dojo. You're right, he said finally. No one is. And then he attacked. The fight was short. There were no flourishes, no shouts, no shows of strength. Just efficiency. The knife flew away with a precise kick. The leader tried to fight back, but his blows were predictable, slow. Bruce blocked a punch, swung the man's arm against his own body, and threw him to the ground with a crash. When the leader tried to get up, Bruce pressed his knee against his back, immobilizing him. Enough, he said, without anger. You don't need to die out of pride. The man spat blood on the mat. You don't understand. They won't stop. Then I'll keep stopping. Bruce released him. The man dragged himself away, limping, followed by the last of his companions, who carried the unconscious man in his arms. Before leaving, he took one last look at Bruce. You just signed your sentence. The dojo fell silent again. The last lesson. The students waited for an explanation, a reprimand, anything. But Bruce just went back to his stretches, as if nothing had happened. Sifu, one of them began, hesitantly. There's nothing to say, Bruce interrupted. You saw it. They learned. But they will come back. Bruce stopped. He looked at the group, one by one, as if evaluating something beyond words. Perhaps. But not today. And then, as if the conversation had ended, it got longer again. The students exchanged glances. Some wanted to ask more. Others just train. But no one dared interrupt the silence that followed. Days later, the news arrived, the Black Dragon Society had been dismantled. Not for Bruce, not for any fighter. But for a police investigation that exposed years of extortion, illegal gambling, and violence. Victor, the giant, gave evidence. The men in suits were arrested. And the leader, the one who had threatened Bruce, was found dead in an alley, not from stab wounds, not from gunshots, but from a single blow to the base of the skull, clean and precise. No one talked about it at the dojo. Bruce continued teaching. The students continued training. And, over time, the story of the confrontation became a legend, one of those that no one knows for sure if it happened, or if it was just a lesson disguised as memory. But those who were there that day knew the truth. It wasn't about winning. It was about being prepared. And, above all, about knowing when the fight was over. The last blow. The months that followed were strangely silent. The dojo maintained its routine, the sound of bare feet on the mat, the crunch of bones as they fell, the murmur of Bruce's instructions. But something had changed. Not in technique, not in discipline, but in the way the students looked at him. Before, he was just the sensei, the man who corrected postures and demonstrated keys with surgical precision. Now, there was a different respect, almost reverential, as if he carried with him a secret that no one dared ask. Among them, only Victor, the Russian giant, seemed immune to the aura of mystery. He kept arriving early, training until sweat soaked his kimono, and leaving without saying a word. Until, one autumn afternoon, when the cold Sao Paulo wind began to cut through the streets, he stopped at the dojo door, his huge hand holding the strap of his backpack. "Sensei." Bruce looked up from the book he pretended to read. Victor never called him that. "I'm leaving." It wasn't a question. It was not a request for permission. It was a warning. "Where to?" "I'm going back home." The Russian shrugged, as if the answer were obvious. "My sister is sick. I need to take care of her." Bruce nodded. She didn't ask how long he had known, or why he had only now decided to leave. There were things that didn't need explanation. "Are you going to continue training?" Victor smiled, a rare flash that lit up his scarred face. "Always." He paused. "But not here." And he left. There were no dramatic goodbyes, nor promises of a reunion. Just the sound of the door closing, light as a sigh. Winter arrived, and with it, a wave of violence that had nothing to do with clandestine struggles. Robberies, sudden kidnappings, a feeling that the city was falling apart at the edges. Bruce kept the dojo open, but students started missing. First one, then two, until, on a night of torrential rain, only he and a 17-year-old boy, thin and scared-eyed, remained on the mat. "Sensei, I don't know if I'll be back." Bruce didn't respond right away. He just adjusted the boy's kimono, carefully tightening the belt knot. "Are you afraid?" The boy hesitated. "I have." "Good." Bruce stood up. "Fear is what keeps you alive. But it's not what makes you fight." The boy looked at him, confused. "So what is it?" Bruce smiled, but there was no joy in the gesture. Knowing that, sometimes, fighting is not about winning. It's about not letting them break you. The boy nodded, as if he understood. But Bruce knew he would only understand years later, when life had marked him enough to recognize the truth in the scars. The last day of the dojo has not been announced. There were no signs on the door, no farewell messages. Just one morning when Bruce arrived early, cleaned the mat for the last time, packed up the equipment, and sat in the center of the room, cross-legged, waiting. The students arrived as always. Some noticed the absence of lights, others the unusual stillness. But no one asked. They just stood silently, as if they knew. Bruce didn't make any speeches. He didn't explain that the rent had gone up, that the violence in the area was unbearable, that he was tired. He just took a deep breath and said, "Today, we trained as if it were the last time." And it was. Nobody cried. Nobody protested. They trained until the sweat ran, until the muscles burned, until the sun set and the shadows lengthened on the mat. When they were done, Bruce got up, grabbed his bag and walked to the door. "The dojo is closed." Nobody followed him. Nobody asked for explanations. They just stood there, looking at the empty space, as if they could still hear the echo of the blows. Years later, a man in an expensive suit walked into a bar downtown. He recognized the face behind the counter, a former student, one of those who had trained until the end. He ordered a drink and, after taking a sip, asked, "Do you still train?" The man dried a glass with a cloth. "No." "Why?" He smiled, as if the answer was simple. "Because I learned everything I needed." The man in the suit nodded, paid the bill and left. He didn't ask about Bruce. He didn't ask about the dojo. I knew that some stories didn't need endings, just silence. And so, between oblivion and legend, the fight ended. Not with a punch, but with a sigh. The last kata. The bar closed late that night. The former student, now owner of the place, turned off the lights and locked the door, leaving only the pale glow of the streetlights reflected in the glass. In the dark, his fingers moved on their own, a quick suki, a precise geden barai. It stopped. He took a deep breath. The air smelled of old alcohol and polished wood, but for a moment, he swore he could smell sweat and tatami wax. The next day, he woke up before dawn. He put on a worn-out t-shirt and sweatpants, put on his worn zori and walked to the old dojo. The door was locked, but the lock gave way with a push, as if the place was waiting for him. Inside, dust danced in the beams of light that streamed through the broken windows. The once spotless mat was cracked and stained. In the center, a single kami was still visible, etched in blood and effort, the mark from where Bruce had last fallen. He knelt down. He didn't pray. He didn't cry. He just closed his eyes and listened. The sound of Chato's footsteps echoed in the memory, light, almost floating. The whistle of the wind cutting through the air before a kick. The dry crack of a perfect blow. And then, silence. Always silence. He got up. Started cleaning. He swept up the dust, repaired what he could, sanded the floorboards until they shined again. When the sun reached its zenith, the dojo was almost as it had been before, minus the smell of life, less the sound of voices. Except Bruce. On the third day, someone knocked on the door. It was a woman, thin, with eyes that had seen too much. He wore a borrowed kimono, 3 sizes too big for him. "I heard this place still teaches," she said, her voice trembling. He didn't respond right away. He just observed her, as Chato did, evaluating posture, breathing, the weight of her body on her heels. "No," he said finally. "Don't teach anymore." She didn't move. "Then why are you here?" He looked at his hands. Old scars, knuckles deformed by time. "Because I don't know how to do anything else," he almost replied. But the truth was worse. Because someone needs to remember. The woman entered anyway. He left his shoes at the entrance and stepped onto the mat carefully, as if he was afraid of waking something that was sleeping. He didn't stop her. "What do you want to learn?" he asked. "Not to be afraid." He laughed. A short, joyless sound. "That can't be taught." "Then teach me how to fight." He hesitated. Then he nodded. The first few months were slow. She tripped over her own feet, her strokes were clumsy, her breathing was always wrong. But it persisted. And, little by little, something changed. Not in the movements, not yet. But in the way she looked at him. No longer as a master, but as a man who also carried scars. "Why did you stop?" she asked one night, after an exhausting session. He was sitting on the floor, his back against the wall. Sweat was running down her face, but it wasn't hers. "Because one day I realized it wasn't about winning anymore," he said. "It was about not breaking." She frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "It does," he replied. "When you fight just to win, you break everything around you. When he struggles not to break, he discovers that the strength is not in the blow. It's about holding on." She didn't understand. Not at that moment. But he continued training. Years passed. The dojo never went back to what it was, it never had so many students, it never echoed with the sound of dozens of voices shouting "Ki." But there was her. And he had it. And sometimes, when the wind was blowing just right, it felt like someone else was there, watching. One afternoon, the woman, now older, stronger, arrived with an envelope. Inside, an old photo, a group of young people in GI, smiling, with Chato in the center, motionless as a statue. On the back, a handwritten phrase. "The true master is not the one who never falls. He is the one who teaches how to get up." She found him sweeping the mat. "Did you know?" he asked, showing the photo. He looked at the image. Then for her. "You knew." Why didn't you ever tell me? Because some things only make sense when you discover them yourself. She kept the photo. He didn't ask anything else. That night, he dreamed about Bruce. Not like he had been at the end, hurt, broken, giving up. But like the first days, laughing, challenging everyone to impossible sparring, with that light in my eyes that said nothing can stop me. In the dream he stretched out his hand and said, "You're still fighting." She woke up sweating. Outside, the city slept. The dojo was silent. And then, she understood. It wasn't about not being afraid. It wasn't about winning. It was about continuing to stand, even when everything around was falling apart. It was about the sigh between one blow and another, that moment when the world stops, and you choose. Choose to breathe. Choose to get up. Choose to fight. The former student found her on the mat at dawn, already in cami, ready. He didn't say anything. He just assumed his position, face to face. And then, they started.